people are often terrified of maths. I might as well play it right now. I have a maths degree, and I was always really good at maths. I was really rubbish at literacy. Since I found out about mental imagery, I realized that I had always been really good at visualizing numbers. To start with, I do sort of 10 minutes on a particular topic, and then I do masses of question and answer to help people with their particular questions. So if you just save your questions and for about 10 minutes or so, that would be great. And so the topic I wanted to cover here was why people are terrified of maths. So I'll start this again. I have a maths degree, and I didn't realize what I was doing with maths and how easy I was finding maths and how very difficult I was finding literacy. And so once I started on empowering learning and we were teaching people literacy, it suddenly dawned on me why I could do maths. And the reason is I could visualize numbers. And so what I'm going to do today is just to tell you how to get from the topics we've been covering for visualizing words to help with literacy to how you're going to use that same skill for helping you with math. And if anybody's on the call, just think for a moment for yourself, is if you don't like math, are you visualizing numbers? How are you trying to add up two numbers? How are you trying to do multiplication? How do you recall numbers in your brain? So just have a little think about that for the moment. So next, learning to visualize numbers is absolutely an essential skill, and we aren't teaching our children how to do this, or even that it's a good idea in my experience. I have to admit that I met I went to a workshop a year or so ago where a guy was teaching parents how to do primary maths. And I went along because I thought, maths is so easy for me, then I will try and find out how to do primary maths. And so I went to this workshop and I listened to what he was saying, and he was teaching people about dice and all sorts of things. And I realized that he was visualizing numbers. And I said to him afterwards, and this is the guy that's teaching our teachers, by the way. That's his normal day job. Teaching his parents is an evening job. And I said to him, you're visualizing numbers, aren't you, when you're doing all this, telling people how to do calculations? And he said, well, yes, of course I am. And I went, but you're not telling the parents that their children need to visualize numbers. And he looked at me absolutely aghast, and he said, but everybody does it. And I said, I'm afraid I've got news for you. There's a lot of people that don't do it. And he was very dismissive and said, that's a learning disability. That's not my problem. And I was so annoyed because what I could see was that it would be really easy to teach people how to visualize numbers. And then they would have a basis for all the maths they were doing. And he was talking about the first years of maths. And so if you get to, I think it's 7 years old when they take their first math test, if you get there without visualizing numbers, you've got a problem. You're not going to be able to do it. And so what I would do for visualizing numbers is to start with objects or counters. So you can start with counters, you can start with pictures of sheep, you can start with flowers, anything. Start with objects so that they start visualizing a number of objects, because our brains work really well that if I say to you, picture a sheep, you've probably pictured a sheep. If I say to you, don't picture a sheep, you've probably still pictured a sheep, and now you're trying to rub it out. And so the best thing to do is to start with objects. It's really easy to picture objects. So you can have one sheep, two sheep, three sheep, or you can start with counters if you prefer, anything which is an object, but don't start with things which aren't objects. So the next thing you can try is dice. Now I have the world's biggest dice here, and so you could start with that. Alternatively, inside I have lots of little dice, and so I'm sure you can all picture what 3 looks like on a dice, or what 5 looks like on a dice. And so that's another place to start. Some children like counting on their hands, fine, but they can actually have imaginary hands. So instead of feeling a bit of a dork when you're in class and you're doing this to add up something, you can just imagine hands, see all 10 fingers in your imagination and count on them. You can do a timeline, which a little frog down the bottom here, he's doing the timeline and adding from 5 up to 9. Or you can use an abacus. Now you can have a real abacus or you can have an imaginary abacus. And I've had several children who get really good at imaginary abacuses. And so they can add up all sorts of numbers. And unfortunately, that's not a colour picture of one. It's much better if you've got a coloured one. Okay, so that's what you do with, that's how you start people visualising numbers. You know, if you're counting blocks, which we have in school, which is 5 along the top row, another 5 underneath, so together they make 10. You can start visualising those. So anything they use in school is absolutely great. You can start using those visually. And so now you're moving on to actual numbers. Now, does anybody know why the numbers are the shapes they are? And I know the answer is going to be to that is no, because I've never met anybody yet who knows why the numbers are the shapes they are. But this is the reason why. It's all to do with the very ancient way that numbers were first created. And so 1 has 1 angle, 2 has 2 angles, 3 has 3 angles, and 4 has 4 angles, so on and so forth, up to 9. Because when they, back in the day when they invented this, they didn't have a naught, and I think where it came from was they used to count on sticks before. And so having counted on sticks for years, they used the straight angles to create the numbers. And of course, when you're counting on sticks, you don't have a naught. And so when later dates it was added, a 0 was added, lo and behold, it's got no angles, which is really neat. So that's why numbers are the shapes they are. And I find that that piece of insight is absolutely invaluable for people. They're amazed that they don't know. That's the first thing. And secondly, people will say to me that now all those squiggles make sense. And so do show that. If you've got somebody who's worried about numbers, do show them why numbers are the shapes they are. And then we can start building on the words. So last week and the week before, and probably the week before that, we were doing words. So now when you picture, you should be, after those quick introductions, you should be able to picture the word cat. So just look up, picture the word cat, and now add a 2 onto the front of it. And now you're visualizing 2 cats, or 7 birds, or whatever it is. And then what you can do is delete the cats, and so you're now just visualizing the number 2 or visualizing the number 7, which is the way you get people into visualizing numbers. I think almost everybody I've ever met who is struggling with maths has never even thought of visualizing a number. And the significant word is mental arithmetic, and it's in the name, mental arithmetic. We have to use our mental skills for arithmetic. That's the first bit. And of course, for doing additions, now you've got yet another tool, apart from counting fingers and counting sheep and whatever else I mentioned on the last slide. You can now count dots. So you've got 3 dots on a 3, you've got 4 dots on a 4, and you've now got 7 dots on a 7. So that's the way you learn to visualize words. And this is the piece that's absolutely magic. Anybody got problems with times tables? This is how you do times tables visually. So that's what's called a number triangle. And number triangles are in school. My daughters were shown number triangles when they went into secondary school because their times tables were terrible. By the way, my daughters are so old that didn't have the benefit of anything I knew about visualizing when they were in school. But they had a sheet with what they call number triangles written on it. And the number triangle means, let's take this as an example, 2 times 5, which is the ones in the bottom, equals 10, which is the one in the top. And of course, you've got the added bonus here that not only does 2 times 5 equal 10, 5 times 2 equals 10 as well. So you've only got to learn half your times tables. Major benefit to tell to kids. The next benefit is that 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. So you've got 4 things on one number triangle. Another major benefit for kids. And that's one of the reasons why they really love number triangles. Just practice with the ones that they find hard to start with. Just 2 or 3 of them all day, something like that, so that they get really good at visualizing those 2. And then they'll be teaching their brain that that's the way they're going to do all of them. You can put them up on the bedroom wall on Post-its. I did have one little girl who did her 3 times tables, the whole lot. I don't really recommend you do them all together, but she did. The whole lot all in one go, put them in a column right next to her bed. And in the morning, she knew her 3 times tables. We don't know exactly how she did that, but it worked. So what I really recommend is 2 or 3 a night. And that's how we do times tables. Of course, I should say, if they've already doing them another way, then leave them doing them that way. Just give them the ones that they're struggling with on the number triangles. And so next week, I'm going to do the following, which is a sort of progression for math, units of measurement, fractions and percentages, doubling and halving, which is another really good one, words that describe shapes. So you've got triangles and parallelograms and things like that, angles, and telling the time. So topics to look forward to for next week. And I'm going to close at that. I'm just going to, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, it's empoweringlearning.co.uk. And I'd be pleased, I'm going to close down the recording and stop sharing my screen, so that you can now ask me questions.